Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm here with Dr. Jeff Tarrant, founder and director of the Neuromeditation Institute. Hello, Jeff.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, I'm great. Learning more about neurofeedback and then how to gain greater cognitive control. It's kind of an obsession of mine, I must say, because I think that's what we really need, that inner freedom. And so I wanted to pick your brain on a topic that I don't see many people talking about. So back when I was studying neuroscience, I know some people were doing transcranial magnetic stimulation and like all kind of experiments where you would turn off certain areas of the brain or stimulate them. I was always a subject in experiments because as a psychology student, you kind of volunteer to your peers, crazy studies. But this is the one where I always said like, you do your brain stimulation, I pass on that one. Like I'm cool within your feedback, but like to stimulate the brain, I feel it's very interesting because it's so effective, but nobody's doing it. So I know you're somebody who's actually very well versed in these kind of techniques. So I want to hear from you about brain stimulation, but not maybe in the clinical setting of like an experiment, but more like, let's say if I came into your practice and I want to become less stressed and maybe focus more, or I want to sleep better, like these everyday problems that everybody has. How could brain stimulation help me?
Yeah, let me do a little bit of explaining how this stuff works. So, really what we're talking about with brain stimulation is most of the techniques, most of the tools that are out there are using some sort of repetitive signal that's like sort of an on and off signal. It's usually some sort of stimulation that is directly affecting the brainwave functioning. And we can affect the brain lots of ways. We can use direct current, we can use alternating current, we can use pulsed electromagnetic, we can use light and sound, we can use photobiomodulation, which is light, near infrared light, and red light. So we can affect the brain and the brain functioning with lots of different tools. And what we want, of course, is that if the brain is stuck in a certain pattern that's maybe not particularly helpful, can we use these technologies and these techniques to sort of nudge the brain? We're kind of poking it and trying to get it in a certain direction, either to activate certain brainwave patterns or certain states, or maybe to quiet some things down, depending on what's
Right.
happening. And so most of the technologies I use are more consumer model technologies. So they're things that I use in my office, but they're also things that people can buy and use at home. So it's a little different than techniques that you might use in a hospital setting, or like you were talking about transcranial magnetic stimulation,
Yeah.
right? And that's a whole crazy, expensive, complicated thing. It's cool,
Right.
but it's not something everybody has access to.
No. And so you're saying people can buy a device and use it at home, for example. So for me, let's say I come in and what happens to me often is that I sometimes get so excited about a topic. I think what I would love to do is to be able to instantly relax. Let's say I'm like all worked up, had a lot going on, and then I just want to like, boom, go into recovery mode immediately. I think that is, for example, something a lot of my clients would love to be able to do because they're all very busy. They do tons of stuff, but then they have trouble sleeping.
Mhm.
Not all of them, but a lot. And so I wonder if I came into your practice and I was saying, I'm very busy, do lots of things, but I want to be able to like recover and relax whenever I need it. What could we be doing?
Yeah, I mean, there would be a couple of different techniques that I would think about. Probably one of my favorites, and I'll talk about that first because I think it might make
Mhm.
sense with the little scenario you set up, but is using something called audio visual entrainment. And I actually happen to have a set of these glasses sitting here. But so it's usually using some glasses that look something like this. I
Huh.
I joke that it's like a bad 1980s sci-fi set of glasses, right?
So for anybody watching on YouTube, you can actually see the crazy visual audio brain entrainment setup that Jeff is showing.
And then on the inside of the glasses, so there's this shield, and there's actually 4 lights on each side kind of behind the shield. And so what happens is you plug these glasses into either your computer or a special little box, a controller box. and you pick a program based on what you are wanting your brain to do. So, for example, in your situation, you said, okay, I want to recover, I want to relax. So, we know that certain brain waves are better for that than others. So, for example, theta brain waves or alpha brain waves, something like that. Well,
Hmm.
you could pick a program that's designed to entrain alpha brain waves. So, alpha is between 8 and 12 cycles per second. That's the speed of the brain wave. And so, what happens, you put these glasses on, and the lights are going to flicker at somewhere between 8 and 12 times a second. So the lights are flickering and, you've got headphones on and there's tones that match. So audio, visual, entrainment. And then what happens is your brain starts to follow that pattern. So frequency following effect, right? So your brain will
Hmm.
follow that pattern. So if I'm pulsing something 10 times a second, the brain starts making more brainwave activity at 10 cycles per second, which is alpha, which then has sort of a relaxing, quieting effect. So we can essentially pull the brain toward the frequency that we want it to move toward. Alpha is a really good one,
Hmm.
but you can use it for sleep, right? You could pull the brain down into a delta brainwave, a really
Right.
slow brainwave. Or we might use it for brain brightening for like the elderly, right? If they're starting to kind of
Ah,
lose some cognitive functioning or ADHD, where we can perk
right.
the brain up, use a faster brainwave, right?
Would that be
Uh,
like beta or gamma or what for that
yeah,
kind of stuff? Because I
yep.
think that's also something a lot of people are interested in, kind of like enhancing cognitive performance. So, what would you use there with ADHD or like to prevent dementia or something like that?
Yeah, you would use something in the beta frequency range. For the glasses, a lot of people like things between 14 and 18 hertz. Sometimes if you get much faster than that, people might feel a little bit anxious because it's really fast.
Right.
However, gamma, which is the fastest, also works really well. And the interesting thing about gamma is there's some other research, and I'm sure you're aware of it, but gamma frequencies, almost no matter how you get it into the brain and body, seems to have a anti-inflammatory effect. And so there may be some additional benefit from using
Mhm.
gamma frequencies. So it's perking the brain up, but it may also have some other effects that are beneficial as well.
That's really cool because I think we can all need that. Very often people want to relax or they want to focus, but they just cannot,
Yeah.
right? And that seems like such a simple way to do it. And so is that some kind of like the entrainment? Is that some kind of physics thing? Like, why does my brain pick up these frequencies? Because I was just thinking if I go somewhere and there's certain music playing, there's probably a lot of entrainment going on in the supermarket because they play
You know,
certain music that makes me buy more stuff. Or like, no, I'm just thinking, like it's a way to influence your brain.
yeah, for sure. And certainly, I mean, everybody can relate to that with different kinds of music. If you're listening to Native American flute music, it's going to cause you to feel a certain way. Whereas if you're listening to, some sort of heavy metal or something, that's going to cause you to feel a very different way. Right. So we know that even just music and tone influences how we feel. This is going just a little bit further because of that repetitive stimuli, which we don't see that in normal types of music, right? They just sort of on and off signal.
Right.
The way that it works is there is this thing in the brain. It's called the frequency following effect that the brain will follow frequencies. Another way, again, without getting too complicated, there's things that happen in the brain, sort of a visual and auditory evoked potential that when you
Right.
present the brain with a stimuli, whatever it is, in this case, it's a flash of light or a sound or whatever, a few milliseconds later, the brain responds to that. So if you keep presenting it with information, the brain keeps responding, right? And so it's essentially tricking the brain into matching that frequency. This is one of my favorite tools. I've been using it for probably 25 years. And
Wow.
I joke sometimes that it's like, I probably work myself out of a job half the time because somebody comes in and they say, hey, I've got this or that issue, or this is what I'm looking for. And I'm like, you know what? You could go buy one of these things, use it every day instead of coming in and paying me twice a week.
Here's one question I have about this. So there are
Yeah.
two questions actually. With neurofeedback, what I love about it is that it's basically just a learning experience you're creating for yourself. So over time, you gain more cognitive control. So it's like not the machine doing it to
Right.
you, your brain learns. So the way I think as a psychologist now, I'm thinking like, this thing is like making my brain do it, which
Right.
to me, I always think it's good to have that self efficacy and that feeling that, like, hey, I made my brain do something. Like it's a cool feeling, right? When you succeed. So can this be combined the way I would set it up? And now you tell me if you think about this differently, but I was just thinking, can you maybe condition yourself so that, for example, right before you play a certain program, you give yourself like a cue so that you do some kind of a classical condition. So let's say before I do the relax program, I give myself a certain sound or some signal so that whenever I play that signal, my brain learns now we're going to relax. Because I was thinking if I had those glasses and they work really well, and then let's say I'm on a trip and I forgot to pack them, is there a way to turn this into a learning experience so that over time you can make your brain do that? Or do you always need the glasses?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And, you know, I don't have any direct evidence to support, that idea of kind of a pairing to create some sort of an association where you can get the brain in that state. But based on everything else we know about how the brain works, that should work, right? The brain is very susceptible to those kinds of connections. And so, if you
Mhm.
pair some sort of a cue with that state, it should theoretically work. The other thing that we notice is that even though it's not the same as neurofeedback, where you're teaching the brain something, what we notice is that when people use the glasses consistently, at the beginning at least, right? So
Right.
maybe several times a week or whatever, that at some point, it's almost like they don't need the glasses anymore or they don't need it as consistently. So, like, somehow they've learned how to maintain that state for longer periods of time. And so it's interesting
Uh-huh.
because on the surface, it doesn't make sense. But I think it may be a learning process that people are learning what that feels like and learning how to stay in that state more consistently, even if it's unconscious. That may not be a conscious thing that they're doing, but we see that a lot. People will start out using it every day of the week for 3 months. And then the next thing you know, they're kind of like, I don't think I need it. And it's like, interesting. Like, what happened? Right? Like, something happened.
No, but that makes a lot of sense because I think we have something similar in your feedback that sometimes your brain just learns, oh, that feels really good. That's a very nice state to be in. Here's how I make those brain waves. And then you even experience them in other settings where you don't have your device and you don't get any feedback. So I mean, subconscious implicit learning is huge. I mean, most of the brain
Yeah,
activity is subconscious. So it's really reassuring. So maybe one more question before
sure.
we thank you for today. I know a lot of people use binaural beats. Is that also a similar thing?
It's similar. It's a little bit different. So binaural beats, of course, are audio only. And
Hmm.
the type of stimulation we were just describing is referred to as isochronic. So it's that kind of on and off. Da, 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 da. So that's what we're describing. Binaural beats are actually taking two offset frequencies of audio information and putting one in the left ear and one in the right. And then the brain does some sort of magical, mysterious subtraction process where it will look at the difference between those two frequencies and sort of create sort of a ghost frequency that your brain will follow. Now, I've looked at some of the research on binaural beats, and from what I can tell, it doesn't seem to be as effective at entraining as the isochronic tones. So those on and off signals seem to be more effective for getting to a specific brain state, whatever you're trying to do. However, there does seem to be something about the binaural process that is very relaxing for most people. I'm not sure it has anything to
Right.
do with the brain waves itself. I don't know what it is, but it seems to just naturally have a relaxing state for people. So what you see with some complicated audio engineer programs is they'll start to combine things. So there may be some isochronic components, there may be some binaural components, and they're using other things that honestly I don't understand. of ways to, entrain the brain. So people are getting quite sophisticated with this work. And so the audio certainly works, right? You can find these things on YouTube or whatever. You can make them yourself. They're not that hard to do. There's lots of programs out there now that'll let you do that kind of thing. They don't seem to be as powerful as using the visual stimulation, which kind of makes sense. The visual seems to be a little more powerful, but the audio certainly works as well.
Right. And also because our brain is highly visual. So like a lot of our brain is dedicated to visual information. So I can totally see how that together with the other sense, it's like a double multimodal thing. So I would have so many more questions, but I think we covered so much. Absolutely fascinating. So thank you so much for your time. I'm not in these business of advertising these glasses, but I just know I'm going to be asked, like, people are going to write me emails like, where can I get Jeff's glasses? So,
Yeah.
where can they find it? How can you get started? And also, maybe give us an idea of like how many minutes per day? Do we do it in the morning, in the evening? Like, what's the spiel here?
Yeah, the time of day, it depends a little bit on what type of program you're using. So if you're using something more stimulating, you would want to do it in the morning. You
Right.
certainly wouldn't want to be doing that before bed. Um, it's kind of like drinking coffee, right? Like you don't want to be drinking a
Yeah.
bunch of coffee, at 8 o'clock at night. Um, although I know a lot of people do. If it's something for relaxation, you don't want to be doing that in the morning necessarily, right? Because you need to be a little bit more alert. So it depends a little bit on the time of day of what you're trying to accomplish and how you're feeling in the moment. The amount of time, usually it takes about 20 minutes is kind of an
Mhm.
ideal amount of time. If you think about it, it's going to take a few minutes for the brain to figure out what the frequency is and to match up with it. That's not going to happen instantaneously. It takes a minute for the brain to kind of
Mhm.
lock in. It takes a few minutes. And then you want to hold it there for a little while to really get the full effect. So for most people, 20-ish minutes seems about
Mhm.
right. And, as far as where they can get more information, there's certainly a bunch of stuff on our website,
Mhm.
neuromeditationinstitute.com. We actually have a YouTube channel that also, we've got several videos about audiovisual entrainment on our YouTube channel, which is also Neuromeditation Institute. So, people can check those things out if they wanted to learn more or even, order their own glasses.
Perfect. Really fascinating because I feel that we all want more control over our brains, and you're somebody who actually does that and teaches people how to do that. So it's so cool to get that really practical but science-based information on how to do it. Thank you so much for sharing it with us and have a great rest of your day.
Yeah. Thank you so much.